Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, literary aviatrix, and I'm excited to talk today with the author of the June 2026 Aviatrix Book Club discussion book, The Aviator and the Showman, Amelia Earhart, George Putnam, and the Marriage That Made an American Icon. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the literary aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Laurie Gwen Shapiro, welcome.
I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm just so excited for this.
I am too. Oh my gosh, I've been watching you on this journey. Could you please give us a summary of this incredible book that you've written?
Well, my book is called The Aviator and the Showman, Amelia Earhart, George Putnam, and the Marriage That Made an American Icon. And this is, a controversial title to begin with. How can you say that a marriage made an American icon? But the story of Amelia Earhart is really that there are two Amelia Earharts. There's the Amelia Earhart before she intersected with her future husband, George Putnam, and the Amelia Earhart that comes after. And there's sort of a media creation of an Amelia Earhart, who is the Amelia Earhart that we still know, that we're still fed stories about. And I want to start at the very beginning of this by saying we are not canceling Amelia Earhart. I love her. I think she's brave. I think she was an extraordinary person. But what I think is that what I've tried to do is change her legacy from things that are just absolutely poppycock to what her real legacy is and how inspiring she remains, and also what ability she did not have as much as the ability that she did have.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to get into this. I'm going to start by confessing my own personal attitudes, maybe misconceptions about Amelia. I went through my active duty military and flying career not really having a whole lot of time to get to know our pioneering women. And so it's been a wonderful journey since I've retired to really get deep into it. And Amelia Earhart is someone who, I, you know, I, I knew she was a pilot. I knew that she was very well known, but I also knew that she hadn't exactly navigated her way fully around her course. And so for me as a pilot, I was like, why? Why are we holding this one woman up as the icon to represent the monolith of women in aviation? I just didn't understand it. And I certainly didn't give her her due respect, to the point that even when I was in my writing for children and young adults, I pitched a book to Scholastic that I wanted to entitle "What Women Fly," and because I wanted to expose children to other women, like it was to do two meanings: what women, like what kinds of women
Right.
fly, and what do they fly. And I pitched it, and of course, the editor was like, "Wow, we're going to need to put a picture of Amelia Earhart on it so it could be recognizable and sell books." And I was like, "That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to tell people there are other pilots."
Well, the thing about Amelia Earhart is that Amelia Earhart gets you in the tent. And I have to confess, this is not my first book. I've written about a stowaway to Antarctica. That was my first nonfiction book. I used to write when I was younger, sort of wacky novels. But nothing has ever gotten this reaction. My book was excerpted in the New Yorker. I'm not a staff writer. I mean, that was, according
Amazing.
to Viking, my publisher, that was unheard of. But the thing is, the reason she gets you in the tent is partly because of the man who was her lover, then her
Yeah.
manager, and then her husband, George Putnam. And she was not destined before she met him to accomplish many of the things that we give her credit for. But the thing that we need to know right up front about Amelia Earhart is that she first became famous as a passenger. Now, a lot of people have forgotten that. In 1928, she was part of a book deal. Putnam Books, George Putnam was not the head of Putnam Books. He was one of the nephews in sort of a game of secession that he would later lose. But he was there was the man in the family publishing firm that was publishing explorers, and he was able to get Admiral Byrd, who was in my first book, The Stowaway, my first nonfiction book, and his other hero was Charles Lindbergh, and he was able to use his Machiavellian ways to get like a message to Lindbergh, and much to the envy of everyone, got a book called We out of Lindbergh, which was one of the great sellers of the Jazz Age. But nobody cares who the second man across the Atlantic is, and that's also not going to sell any books. So Amelia Earhart comes in the story as a woman who is cast. I mean, for all
Mhm.
intents and purposes, this is the first reality show. She has no clue that her name is even being bandied about. She's at this point in her life, although she's from Kansas and had lived in New York, going to Columbia night school, moved out to California, had high school experiences in Chicago. She's living in Boston. She is a social worker. That is a way for women to
Right.
climb up. If anyone knows Frances Perkins, she was the first woman on the cabinet. That was the aviation was not a way for women to go up. You could do
No.
a couple of stunts, but the men had the hours from World War I, and there really wasn't any chance, but as social worker, she could, but she was a flying social worker. She was a hobby pilot, and she was really quite good-looking woman and very, all American, and that is what the concept was. There was a woman named Amy Phipps Guest, who was the wealthiest woman in America, and she wanted her life to count. She wanted to buy her way to be a passenger, and actually 7 women tried to do this, and 6 of them died. So even being a passenger as a woman was gonna get you famous.
Right.
But that's what I wanna say, is that when Amelia comes into the story, into the American imagination, where she's introduced with a haircut that was not her haircut, that androgynous haircut was to look more like Charles Lindbergh. This was all a marketing thing, but she's given a platform,
Yep.
and she very quickly becomes world famous. She will become much more famous in 1932, and we'll get to that when
Yep.
she actually does fly across the Atlantic alone. But she uses her platform for good. From the very get-go, she is an ardent feminist. She's told to tone it down a number of times, and that is a tremendous legacy to me.
Same to me, and that's what I was going to say is that once I started reading about her and learning more about her, I realized that I wasn't appreciating really what she stood for and her the strength of her advocacy and her positioning to be able to advocate in that way. And so this book and then as I've made my way and we'll talk about it more, as I've been making my way through not just sort of more modern books that are still in print, but also discussing our pioneers' memoirs, that source material with my good friends, Captain Jenny Beatty and Dr. Jackie Boyd. We've been reading the memoirs of her contemporaries and the
Eleanor
and
Smith
yes, that
is
that you've got all over this book. I'm so
yeah,
excited to
she's
talk about
someone
this
that
one.
emerges to me as someone who was always denied agency. She was mocked by female biographers as a liar, even at the Smithsonian. And I love my contacts at the Smithsonian. I had to go rounds with them to show she was always telling the truth.
Yeah, wow.
Amelia Earhart even, you could say it's a good cop, bad cop situation, but she was being promoted as the queen of aviation, Amelia Earhart,
Right,
and she wasn't really that great a pilot,
right.
especially up until 1929. And she had a faked license. She was being promoted as someone with the fourth transport license. And, I have to say that Eleanor Smith was saying this all the time. And when you go to the paperwork, and I'm someone who is known for my very deep dives of research, I don't take anyone at their word.
Right.
I look for original source material. Biographers make mistakes, and
Mhm.
mistakes can be carried from book to book
They
to book.
do, they are. I'm finding that everywhere, yes.
And one of the great sources for me, believe it or not, was Eleanor Smith's daughter, who is still alive, who lives in New York City, and she's in
Amazing.
her 90s, and she grew up with Eleanor Smith. And so Eleanor Smith becomes one of the characters that racks more into focus, but there's other great names. I mean, this is literary aviatrix, but we have other women whose books I ask you to find. Louise Thaden
Yeah.
is a tremendous source as well for me, not just from her book, but she wrote often about how Amelia Earhart was pressured to fly the other way around the world towards her demise, but she's also a good friend of hers. Some
Right.
people have challenged Eleanor Smith, oh, maybe she was her rival but Eleanor Smith was actually friends with Amelia
And she
Earhart.
was very respectful of her, so I
Yeah,
think
she
that's
just
wrong.
didn't
Yeah,
like her husband. But
yeah.
the thing that's really interesting is Louise Thaden appears on, audio tapes that really changed my book. I had started to hear about them almost like the gold at the end of the rainbow while I was writing this book, that there was a man named Elgin Long who had been recording a lot of people who were still alive in the early 1970s, like many men, and I'm married to a man, I love men, but not all men.
Not
But
all
like
men.
but like many men, the object of Amelia Earhart, and I say the object is like to prove how she died. That's really what they care about.
Right.
Few people have even Elgin Long is like doing this project not to find out who Amelia Earhart is, but to prove how she died. And in the interim, he's asking questions, a few personal questions. So I was hoping to get these tapes. I had heard there were over 200 hours of tapes with dozens of people, and I was able to get it towards the end of my project. And I could hear Louise Thaden, who was one of Amelia's best friends, and Jackie Cochran, and all these
Mhm,
people just talking off the record about Amelia and her lack of navigational skill, but her ability to lead women and
mhm.
her bravery and her kind-heartedness. I listened to hundreds of hours of tapes. I didn't hear a bad word about Amelia Earhart except for some of her flying ability, but I didn't hear a good word about her husband.
Yeah.
So
So, if there's any doubt. So, let's back this up, okay?
sure.
We just jumped right into it, but
I know.
how
There's a
did
lot
you
to
come
unpack in the Amelia Earhart story.
we're just gonna keep going with it in a minute, but how did you come to this story? Like, what piqued your interest and how did you get into it?
Well, as I said, I used to write funny novels and I wanted to reinvent myself. As a middle-aged woman, I always read The New Yorker, I read The Times a lot, I read nonfiction books, and I had very early luck writing a novel called The Unexpected Salami, which was, reviewed by Anthony Bourdain before he was famous. I had a film deal the next day, and I was sort of way too young to be I mean, what really young person can enter the depth of life? But I got lucky, and then I got pushed into that was with Algonquin, which was a really great publisher. And then I got pushed into chick lit, which if anyone watching this remembers the Bridget Jones Diary era. And there's nothing wrong with those books. I was a young mother and I was able to make an income, but it wasn't who I felt I was as a writer. And when I had started a track record of these kind of books, um, I told my agent, I that's not who I really want to be. I really want to be writing serious nonfiction and for the New Yorker. And she said, "Well, that's not who you are." And that's the first lesson I hope anyone listening to this I knew who I was, and
Right.
I switched agents. She was a lovely person, but, that was not I mean, and so I started my nonfiction career in my mid-40s. I'm gonna be 60 in July. I can't
You go,
believe
girl.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
And the thing is that and I'm a professor also of nonfiction. I'm a professor at NYU of journalism right now, which all came about after I was told that's not who I was. But the thing I was gonna say is the first book that I sold was a book about a stowaway on the first expedition to Antarctica. The man of the hour was Commander Richard Byrd, who we later know as Admiral Byrd, and he had a very powerful publisher named George Palmer Putnam. And I started to research that because Amelia Earhart is flying over the ship that has a stowaway who's the title is of my book was The Stowaway, a young kid who swam across the Hudson River to go to Antarctica. And Amelia Earhart's plane in 1928 is dipping. And this is a few months after she became famous as a passenger. And I just thought, what is Amelia Earhart doing here? I loved Amelia Earhart. I mean, who doesn't have the Scholastic book of Amelia Earhart? We all have that Scholastic book.
Yeah.
It was the first biography I ever read. My mom said, you got to get that. She's great. And I basically did a bit of research and realized, oh my God, Amelia Earhart's having sex with George Palmer Putnam. That is not in my Scholastic book. really interesting. And so later on when my that book did pretty well. It was like it brought me out of my chick lit era, and I was in the, in the Times and Wall Street era that also got options. I was being taken seriously, and my agent said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "What do we actually really know about Amelia Earhart?" And honestly, and I'm going to be completely honest, I am not a pilot. That
Mhm,
is not, I am a journalist. And I just thought, I don't even know if she was a good pilot. I don't even know if she was a good woman. I mean,
mhm.
Charles Lindbergh was a terrific pilot, but later on,
He's
he
got a little weird,
he
yeah,
got a little weird, and
yeah,
I was like, "Was Amelia Earhart flirting with fascist policies?" I just didn't know anything about her, and I didn't even know, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm married to a man. I wouldn't care what her sexuality or gender orientation was. I don't care. I'm from New York, but
yeah.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if this was a fake marriage, a marriage of convenience, and I just started having this conversation with my agent. He said, that's a really great spot, and then I started to do when before you sell a book, you do a proposal, so
Mhm,
you do a little bit of research. Enough I did about 6 months of research, just,
mhm,
going to archives, looking to see what I could find, and you're asking for money to then do the deeper dive. And,
right,
places that I went with that money were Newfoundland, where a lot of the story takes place. I went there for 2 weeks. I went to all archives all over the United States that, an academic, book might not have the budget for, but I
right,
was able to connect the dots. But, people know what's in their archive, but when you do a for-profit Big 5 book, you'll get more money up front, but you better use that money or else you're not gonna have much of a book. And I
yeah,
would use it to go to archives and find things that no one had looked at ever. Among my early finds was an archive at, the University of New Hampshire, which was, not touched because it was by a conspiracy theorist who I don't believe anything to do with Japan, by the way. If anyone's believing that, I'm gonna give you a little bit of a bitch slap. But this guy did not get a good advance, and he started to invent the story about Saipan, and I found cash checks from the expert witnesses and demands for more money, and I also found people, this was from the '50s, people were alive that knew Amelia Earhart, including Hilton Rayleigh, who's a very important part of the story. He was there with George Putnam as a PR guy who was casting, um, uh, Amelia Earhart, and he was with her at all times and knew both of them. And he is telling this biographer, whose name was Paul Briand, that what you're saying about Japan is nonsense. Let me tell you the real story about what happened. And all of these people that were talking in 1958 are dead, and it's in an archive in New Hampshire, so it was off the record at the time, but because it's in a university archive, it's very much on the record and of use to me. And it was that plus the tapes that I got later and all sorts of various interviews that I did, that I was able to piece together a much more accurate story. And there, by the way, I'm going to say there are hundreds of books about Amelia Earhart. It's not like I'm the first biographer, but what I do believe is I've come closest to the truth. I think that there's big money in a squeaky clean version of anyone. And you're often the biggest mistake, I teach this as a journalist, is don't work with the estate. The estate has their own agenda. You
fair
know,
enough, yeah.
like if you work with an estate, George Putnam's going to come off as a kind prankster, a good PR maven. He's a really cruel person who tried to squash not just Eleanor Smith, but Lady Heath, other women. He was cruel. I mean, let's just say it. But did have a real sexual marriage with Amelia Earhart. This story begins in the Jazz Age, and he's a married man. He's married to the
Mhm.
Crayola crayon heiress, Dorothy Binney Putnam. And let's not get too sorry for her. She's got a lot of money. And she's got a lot of power because she doesn't need Putnam.
Right.
Like when you have your own money. And she's also got her own lovers going on in the 1920s. It's anything goes, but the world changes, just like the world changed during the COVID era for all of us. The world that Amelia Earhart and George Putnam meet in 1928, and she becomes a millionaire, a social worker who quickly becomes a millionaire after George's management with fancy cars and the whole and mink coats. um, the stock market crashes.
Right.
And George Putnam, I mentioned there was a game of secession. He does
Mhm.
not win because he does things like pretend that his family genteel firm is being blown up by fascists. He writes the fake letters. He'll later fake his own kidnapping. His uncle, who's the head of Putnam Books, George Haven Putnam, does not leave him the company, and he's pushed out. He's broke, and the person that is most loyal to him is Amelia Earhart, and she comes with him, and later on, after 7 attempts at asking her to marry, uh, uh, him, she agrees to, and this relationship, which starts out as a really sexual relationship, and there are people on tape talking about this as well, so I'm not just oh, you mean Dorothy Binney Putnam was recorded saying that she walked in on her husband having sex with Amelia Earhart. That's not in the Scholastic book.
That's also not
So it's like, that's pretty good sourcing. But it becomes a different type of relationship. If you have a partner that you made it through the pandemic with, it becomes a partnership of survival. We are in the throes of the Great Depression. Amelia Earhart and George Putnam get married. They are house rich, cash poor, and they need money. And the way to make money is speaking engagements by Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, so, oh my gosh, you just covered so much territory there. Okay, so, I think this is kind of a spoiler, but it's tantalizing enough that even if you hear it from us, you're still gonna you wanna read the book. You definitely wanna read the book
Please read the book.
to see how well Laurie has unfolded this story for us. But there are people who I think, there's the two camps like you talked about. And if you want to get more explicit about that in just a second, about like what the guys are interested in about Amelia and what women hold up, and you do that really well in one of the images in the book. You have sort of two magazine covers. One is a guy's
Yeah,
magazine and
one's
one
Miss
is Ms.
Magazine.
Right, yeah, and, like, we're all loving her because she's a feminist and she's an
She was my
advocate
mother's hero for
for
sure.
women's rights, and they're all only concerned about well, now I think there are some people in our community who hold her up so highly that they just bristle at the idea this feminist who is advocating for women's rights could possibly have been manipulated or have been, duped in any way by a man. And so I think there are people who take issue with your book because it feels like you're saying something along the lines of, well, Amelia maybe wasn't completely 100% aware of what the
I
agenda
don't think
was
that's
behind her
true.
back.
I think
So, what do you have to say to them?
I don't think that's what I'm saying at all.
Yeah,
I believe that spoiler alert, Amelia Earhart disappears and dies at the end of the book.
there we are.
And there
Yep.
is an afterlife of what happens with her, like with her husband and his 3rd and 4th marriage, and how her name is used. Um, but I don't think that George Putnam caused Amelia Earhart's death. I don't think that Amelia caused Amelia Earhart's death. I think Amelia and George caused Amelia Earhart's death. Amelia knew, I mean, there's archives that are in Florida, sorry, in Virginia, of her talking to the aviation reporters that were covering her, who are trying to convince her to marry Putnam because it's a way to get married. In my book, I show that she had, I mean, there's no other way around this, a sugar daddy in the jazz age. She's been told that she's going to, we've been told that she saved up for this yellow car and drove her. I know it was given to her by a man in his 60s when she was 21, who she wanted to marry because he had a lot of money. We're told that she was engaged to another man named Sam, but that was because her parents, who were Victorian parents, said you can't marry a 68-year-old man. I mean, so what it shows you is that from the very get-go, Amelia is ambitious. And I like ambitious women. I'm an ambitious woman. I hope, Liz, that you're an ambitious woman. And there's a woman in the Amelia Earhart story named Mabel Bowl, who was her competitor trying to race across as a passenger in 1928. And she's portrayed as the Queen of Diamonds. And she married a wealthy man. And then he died and she was able to pay for trips on planes. she's the same thing as Amelia Earhart. She's trying to I mean, like, why are they any different?
Yeah.
What is it so bad to say Amelia Earhart wanted to fly?
Yeah.
Flying costs money. There wasn't a lot of ways to do this. She was someone who had many, many careers. By the time she becomes famous as a passenger, she's what in 1928 is middle aged, which is 31. Sounds very young to me right now. But the thing is, she had a meat packing company. She had been a waitress. She had all sorts of jobs, and she kind of found herself in flying, and especially when she suddenly became famous against her expectations. It wasn't something she was planning. She had this tremendous platform, and she could talk not just about aviation, which she loved. She loved to fly, and she loved the world of aviation. She loved feminism, and she realized that she was in many ways the first influencer, and she could talk about aviation, but she also could be arrogant, and she could be, not doing things that she had to do to be to get her skills up. As I mentioned, there's the Great Depression is running on, and she is doing over 350 lectures a year, not getting flight time. I mean, I've met many pilots who know that you need the flight time to get good at what you're doing. She's on to a new plane. She crosses the Atlantic in the Red Vega, which is now hanging in the Smithsonian. It's a great plane, and she almost doesn't make it. She's missing for 12 hours. She's supposed to go to Paris.
Right.
And she lands up in a cow field in Derry, Ireland, but, mock it, wasn't where she was supposed to go. Lindbergh, boom, he lands in Paris. He's not a nice guy, but he made his flight perfectly. But she is the second person to go across the Atlantic, male or
Right.
female. And what is totally not in question about Amelia Earhart is that she's super brave. What kind of bravery do you have to do this? But she's also quite careless. And that is something that you see all through the book. On that first flight, the friendship, the pilot for that flight is named Wilmer Stoltz. He's an alcoholic, and she's literally throwing bottles of alcohol, but she gets on that plane, and George Putnam is also putting her on that plane. They're both reckless. In my book, I talk about kid explorers who were forgotten. They were sent on life-threatening missions for books. In one book, 4 of the boys died. It's a Putnam bestseller. This is a reckless publisher. Later on, when Amelia Earhart tries to do this flight across around the world, she originally goes the other way, and she's not trained enough. Her own flight coach, Paul Mance, thinks she's not ready. And he actually flies the plane to Hawaii, secretly to just show her one last time because they have a book deal. There's a lot of pressure, and the plane ground loops. And if they were broke before, they're even more broke now. And she wants to do this flight the same way, which means the gimmick is that they're going to be flying around the equator. I mean her and her second navigator, Fred Noonan. She has a different navigator for the first trip, who quits because of Amelia Earhart's lack of ability.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not going to kill myself. He sees, he's like after the ground looping. But Fred Noonan, who's a tremendous navigator, he's a celestial navigator, he's the best in the business, but he's fired from Pan Am. I will say I recently did the Pan Am podcast. It was great, but I went a couple rounds with people when I said they hired a man who was an alcoholic, a
Yeah.
notorious alcoholic. He was fired by Pan Am. They did not. I mean, the person doing the podcast wanted to do this, but Pan Am was like, some people on the board saying, "Can we say that?" But they went back to to Pan Am. That's what he was fired for, alcoholism. So you're hiring an alcoholic navigator, and it's not a problem in the beginning, but as you listen to the tapes that I was listening to, the people that were even drinking with him, multiple people, the hotel owners were seeing him rip roaring drunk. They're fighting this whole idea that they were on perfect terms is false. I mean, it's a real S show. I
Yeah.
took out the 3 letters there. And,
Yeah.
and I'm just saying that it's also makes for a better story. I mean, my story is real. It's
Yep.
fact checked. If I'm saying something, I better back it up. And I will say that everything that I've said about Amelia Earhart, even some of the stuff that was controversial, is backed up because I made the most controversial part went as an excerpt to the New Yorker, and I'm not a staff writer. They put 2 fact checkers on me for 14 hours a day for 6 days, and I made it through with flying colors. Like, you
Wow.
cannot say something false and have it get through the New Yorker. It's one of the last, you know, bastions of fact checking. So
Wonderful.
I feel very comfortable with everything that I've said. I mean, they would actually have me in the most controversial moments have multiple backup sources. But what I'm saying is at the very end, one of the sources is Louise Thaden. Anyone watching this podcast probably knows she's wonderful. She was the one who won the women's air derby in that Amelia Earhart came in 3rd, but it was sort of a cheat to get it to 3rd. Like, if you read the book, you'll see what I mean. But Louise Thaden is a great friend of Amelia Earhart. She loves her. She adores her. She thinks she's an incredible organizer. I mean, we might want to point out that Louise Thaden was supposed to be the president of the 99s, which and anyone watching this podcast probably knows is the Organization of Women Pilots. But Amelia Earhart was not supposed to be the first president, but she was the one that got the press attention. And Louise stepped aside, and they all agreed that Amelia should take over. And Amelia stepped up to this role. And one of the things we don't give her credit for is what a great organizer she was, how she rallied women to be part of the 99s. And we still have that organization today.
Yeah.
Now, history is not clean. One of the things you find out when you do research is that we always talk about the 99 original women pilots, but it was the 99 white women pilots.
Oh,
So
for
that's
sure.
something
Yeah.
that we need to know, that, and I don't think that Amelia Earhart was involved with that, but there are archives of people that are great pilots are not always um, the best people. They could be a great pilot and and there's records of racism later on with people like Jackie Cochran, who's probably a better pilot than Amelia Earhart.
Oh,
And
for
so
sure.
this is really
Not
this
probably, for sure.
yeah,
But
this
yes,
is
and
the
also a
yeah.
racist. Yeah.
This is what I'm saying. She becomes the 2nd
Yeah.
president of the 99s. But this is the thing that's so interesting to me about Amelia Earhart. I think a lot of the women that were better pilots, and there are people like Laura Ingalls, who was also a Nazi
Yeah.
sympathizer. You say that fast. She was a really terrific pilot.
Yeah.
Um, we don't want to necessarily, talk about her today,
Mhm.
but Amelia Earhart is someone who used her platform. And you have to remember that the whole aviation industry like, had been on a high, especially after the movie
Right.
Wings, which George Putnam was involved with, as well as, Lindbergh, and it was just, like, racing forward, and then the Great Depression happened, and what Amelia Earhart very smartly did was she was almost an ambassador of the air. She loved aviation, and she got women to go as passengers on planes and would
Mm.
say, "You should teach your children to be pilots, your daughters to be pilots. We should go on planes and it's the future." She almost single-handedly got people in America flying again. And when you go on a plane today as a passenger, you can thank Amelia Earhart for that. I mean, she really was someone who was a booster for aviation as well as for women's rights. And I
Yeah.
think that one of the things that I really want to mention is that among the many people that I interviewed for this book, dozens and dozens of people, including the children of those children explorers are still alive. Um, I was able to I was able to interview the astronauts, the women astronauts, and their hero is Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
So, as childhood hero, maybe their heroes change as you get older and you have, but think about that. You don't get Amelia Earhart getting women into space without George Putnam, who's
Yeah.
not the nicest guy in the world. So, history is not clean. And I wanted to write an Amelia Earhart book for adults. This is not an Amelia Earhart book that I suggest giving to your 8-year-old kid. Let them have the Scholastic book. Let them have that. But when they turn 15, maybe they can have this book.
Yeah, maybe they could have the
But
the
Amelia Earhart is still a wonderful person. She
Right, and I
That's
think
the
that's
thing
where
that
I
I
wanted to get to, is it's like she has a goal, she has a platform, and when I say that, I mean she has an agenda of her own
Oh, and it's
for which
women. It's women
for
aviation.
yeah, for which this, opportunity with George Palmer Putnam, like that allowed her to, proselytize her views on, women's rights. And
Right.
she used, like you said, used that for the forces of good. That
And
doesn't
not and not look at Lindbergh. Look what he's doing in the '30s. Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Really.
And I will say, one of the things that really heartened me is that Amelia Earhart politically evolves. I was a little scared, like with, and when you go into history, you're going to find things that are ugly because where you have to go by the times. For example, in the 1920s, everybody believed in eugenics. There's one interview with a black journalist who gets her when George Putnam's not paying attention,
I saw, yeah, that was fabulous
and
actually.
says, "I don't think that, has believes that there's wonderful things that black aviators are doing, but that they shouldn't get married." Later on,
Yeah.
I found archives at the Eisenhower Library where Jackie Cochran puts her archives, okay? Because she's a big Eisenhower supporter. And there's an interview with her by Stuart Stern, who was trying to make a movie about Amelia Earhart in 1973. He wrote Rebel Without a Cause, and he loved Amelia Earhart. And he realized that the story of Amelia Earhart was really her and her husband, and that her husband was mean, and his fourth wife was alive. But in this interview, Jackie Cochran is talking about Amelia's obsession with civil rights. Remember, she meets Eleanor Roosevelt. She's pushing for black rights.
Yeah.
She, she's not. She's using her platform to talk to politicians and saying we should raise the rights of black Americans. This is a very different person from the 1920s, Amelia Earhart. She evolves.
Yeah,
And
which is
that's pretty nice to find as a biographer.
yeah, but it's no surprise that she does. I mean, it's, because if it all seems genuine to her, if she's being further enlightened as she travels and she has the opportunity to do these talks and does whatever she does at Purdue, like all of these things expose her to
Right.
new information and she evolves. That's not surprising. It seems completely aligned with her character.
She's a very, very curious person. I found one lost article that actually explains what's books are on her bookshelf. It actually goes, and it's like, and I will tell you that I was able to, I'm a journalist, remember. I'm not an aviator, but
Yeah.
I was able to use my journalism skills to get into every single house that she lived in.
Neat.
And um there's gonna my film has been bought as a documentary, so we'll see if those
Oh my
places show
gosh,
up.
that'd be amazing.
Um, so the thing I'm gonna say is that she lived in Rye. She moved in after the Crayola Crayon queen moved out.
Right.
She's the new lord of the lady of the manor. She's moved into that house. There were I was in the house. It's a private home. There were books that were still there. I was in her Los Angeles home in Toluca Lake. I was able to get in there and talk to the person that lives there, and there were some things left over. The George Putnam will remarry a young woman. He has a girlfriend within about 6 weeks, a stunt woman that after she's gone, he's pretending that she's lost at sea. He then marries a woman, he dumps the stunt woman and marries a woman he thinks is a Beverly Hills, heiress. She thinks he's a wealthy publisher, and they both got it wrong. That's when he fakes his own kidnapping, but it's also when he sells Amelia Earhart's books, for auction to raise money. Remember, this is 1937,
Mhm.
38. The Depression is not over, but I got a list through the auction of all the books that she's reading, which really lines up with what is in the old article. And I was able to go to Dallas, Texas, to heritage auctions because I had written an article for the New York Times about a helmet, a leather flying helmet that she dropped, that went to auction. When they photo matched it, it was something that she dropped during the Air Derby in Cleveland. It's a great story. And Heritage was so excited that this article, the the helmet ended up going for $800,000. It was like they didn't because of the article. It
Yeah.
was very viral. So they invited me to Dallas because they were doing a private auction, and Elgin Long, whose tapes were the ones that I ended up listening to, he was a big lifelong Amelia Earhart collector. He had a number of her diaries and her books, and they were all going into private collections, and Heritage allowed me to be there for 3 days and go through everything, and I could see that she was a good reader. What she wasn't, by the way, was a tremendous writer. She dabbled in poetry. She's an okay poet, but her books are ghostwritten. I interviewed I found the ghostwriters' estates. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Penelope Green from the New York Times. She's a columnist. Her grandfather, Fitzhugh Green, was her first ghostwriter, and that's acknowledged to me by Penelope. Other ghostwriters are on record. She was the aviation um, editor for Cosmopolitan. Her ghost writer is on record. So she's also not fashion designer. She's not making those clothes. Like if you believe that Kim Kardashian is making those clothes, but this is okay. This is like, what do you want this lady to do? You want her
Right.
to be everything all at once? I mean, she's an incredible aviator. In she might not be she might be reckless and she might almost die, but she's so brave and she is breaking records despite the fact that she's not doing she's not learning Morse code, she's not getting all her skills, she's always on the road, but she's really taking chances. She also believes that women should have the ability to take the chances that men take. We don't think about the early astronauts, the male astronauts who were almost 50% gonna die. We don't say, "Oh, how could they go up in the sky?" She believed that women should be able to take the risks if they want to.
Yeah.
Right? Now, other women were safer, got their license in order, got their skills up. Amelia Earhart was very lackadaisical about getting all her skills up to the highest level because she had a lot of money to make. She was keeping them afloat. They were not wealthy. One of the things you need to realize is that very last flight was not really to better womankind. The flight across the Atlantic was
Was to make money
right.
for her and George. Yeah.
Right, but the last one was a retirement plan.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
equivalent of millions of dollars that was riding on this,
Yeah.
including an NBC radio deal, including a Harper& and Row book, including a Quaker Oats youth ambassador, uh, but, like, I don't even know what that was, but that got canceled. She had Bernard Baruch, who was one of the wealthiest men in America, was gonna do a film with her after she got back for $1,000,000. Um, and she almost made it. She was fighting with Fred Noonan in Ley, New Guinea. That's on record on these tapes. The people who were drinking with him are talking about how he's calling her a skinny bitch. I mean, that's not in the Scholastic book, you
Nope.
know?
Mhm.
But there's a man named Harry Balfour who is a radio operator in Ley, and she wants him to get on that plane to go towards Howland Island, which is the scariest stretch that Louise Thaden and Jackie Cochran had pleaded with her not to do this because it was
Yeah.
a suicide mission if she ran out of fuel, which is what happens. And she tries to get him on the plane because she did not bother to learn Morse code, and Fred Noonan did not learn Morse code. They left behind trailing antennas. There was a lot of incompetency at the end, and George Putnam took over. That would be like my taking over an aviation plan.
Right.
He was a PR guy. They had had people that knew about aviation before. They didn't have any money, so he's like, "I'll take over." And there's a lot going on. Louise Sadin says on tape that she did not want to fly that way around the world. She wanted to wait and follow the plan where Howland Island comes first.
Mhm.
And George Putnam said, "You know what? You have to do this. We have a book deal. We have to get this book out by Christmas." There are women on tape talking about how he's belittling her, and she's like upset, and she just feels a lot of loyalty to him. Is one of the things that the other women pilots are saying. Jackie Cochran despised George Putnam, but felt that Amelia Earhart really did love him. But
Mhm.
for any woman who's listening to this and saying Amelia Earhart did not react that way to George Putnam, it's not what the evidence points. Sometimes she was strong and sometimes she was cowering. And if anyone's been in a long-term relationship, that's what marriages or partnerships look like. There's
Yeah.
years when you're really close together, and there's years where you're fighting. That very last year, Amelia was spending most of her time at Jackie Cochran's ranch, which was, she co-owned with Floyd Oldham, who was again another wealthy man and during the Great Depression, partly to get away from George Putnam, you know?
Yes. Okay.
There's a lot.
Yeah, I keep having, like, threads that I wanna pick up, and then, like, we're on to 8 other things. Okay. No, but, like, let me just jump in here as a pilot, okay? And so
Good.
thinking about the ways that I have read, both her own, talking about the things that she's had to do to be on the road, but also the memoirs of other, sister pilots of the time who were really focused on flying. They were really, really dedicated and focused on flying. And anything beyond that, any
I don't
ancillary benefit to women in general was cherry on top, but the flying was the thing. And you can see that as when we read the story about Eleanor and the Belanca aircraft and that whole incident where she flew with her and actually firsthand saw where her proficiency was.
yeah.
Any pilot knows if you're like focusing on running around the country and doing talks and you're not flying and you're not maintaining proficiency and you're not improving your skills and you're not adding on those specific skills that you're going to need for a long distance flight, obviously we
And
all know, we all know.
you're falsely being promoted by
Yeah.
your manager as having the 4th transport license. So
Right.
one of the things that was happening is that Amelia Earhart was often being, flown by other pilots,
Yeah.
and they were told to pretend not to say that. And she was getting secret lessons, and this, I've did a lot of research. Yeah, I'm gonna be the official Harrison literary ambassador for this summer, and I'm gonna be touring Amelia Earhart. If anyone's in Westchester, come, check the Harrison Public Library. But I did a lot of research. I live in New York City. I was able to go there. She did try to get her flying up. She did get to be a better pilot. She did
Yeah.
get her transport license, but she got it almost a year and a half after it was announced in the public that she had it. And Eleanor Smith was saying that.
Yeah.
And other biographers would say, "Oh, she's a liar. She's jealous. How could that be? Because she got the transport license." But there's no paperwork that supports anything other than it came much later. And that she was friends with the people that were announcing that. And they said, "Get your skills up, and we'll say the paperwork was lost."
And we talked about already, it's like you can respect somebody and admire them. And as a pilot, though, we understand that there are standards that you have to uphold to be safe and operate safely. And so criticizing somebody's flying based on the facts, the evidence in front of you. She's on the road for 350 days a year doing talks. When is she getting her hours in? When is she getting her practice
And
in? So
sometimes she's
yeah.
doing 2 talks a day.
Yeah.
And I wanna say that one thing that you'll find in the book is that when she gets on this last trip, she gets dysentery, in Indonesia. She is really sick. She's a skinny woman, and she drops another 10 pounds,
Yeah.
and she's vomiting, and she's got diarrhea, like, let's just say it, and she's fighting with her navigator who's starting in Singapore, starts to slip into drinking again after he promised not to, and she didn't like him to begin with, which is in the archives. She had to pretend that she liked him. And by the time they get to New Guinea, to Papua New Guinea, which at that point is an Australian territory and it's an Australian run bars, and I'm married to an Aussie.
Oh, cool.
It's an alcoholic culture. My husband's not alcoholic, but they love to drink,
Yeah.
and that's where he is. You have an alcoholic who's in an Australian bar in the middle of New Guinea,
Yeah.
and, like, he's drinking. And, what's really interesting is she wants to get home. She's very close to the end of the trip. I've been on 30 cities, with my book. I'm at the end of a year of it coming out. One of the places I went to was the EAA event, the Oshkosh fly-in, and I met,
Yeah.
of course, 700,000 pilots. It was amazing. But one of the things I picked up from pilots, I did not know this term. It's not in my book. It's something is the expression of get homeitis.
Yeah, I was gonna go there with you, like, there's so many, like, red flags all along this trip,
Even the fact that she
so many times to call it, like, so many reasons to call it for safety, and they've got all of these external pressures, the
I mean, the
time,
thing
the
is,
money.
as
Yep,
as I said, she's trying to get a radio operator who knows Morse code on the plane with her in New Guinea, and his boss, an Australian named Eric Chater, says, "No way." Now, why is there an Australian town? This is not an indigenous town. This is an airline strip because they're bringing gold in and out of New Guinea. So there's lots of planes there. And they need the radio operator. They can't lose the radio
right.
operator because the planes are going to crash. And his boss says, "No way." So Amelia Earhart is trying to get someone on the plane. She has dysentery. She has got an alcoholic navigator who she takes for a ride the day before the trip to an indigenous town, ostensibly to write her column for the New York Herald Tribune, which is another source of income, which is being ghostwritten. She sends wires notes and they turn it into a column.
Mm.
But she's basically putting eyeballs on Fred
Yeah,
Newman,
she's babysitting him. Yeah,
making sure that he at least doesn't get on that plane drunk.
right.
Right? But he was rip-roaring drunk 2 days before.
Yeah,
Now, that said, he's such a good navigator, that they get right to Howland Island. On these tapes are people from the Coast Guard that are talking to Amelia Earhart.
yep.
It's incredible. If anybody wants to listen for yourself, you could do it from your home. It's called the Amelia Earhart Project. It's with the Smithsonian. You just dial it up. You can listen to Louise Thaden for sure. You'll have a whole different view of Amelia Earhart's flying ability.
Mhm.
Um, but you'll also like Amelia Earhart at the end of the tape, so I'm telling you that too. But you really can hear the people from the Itasca, the Coast Guard cutter, which
Mhm.
is basically parked in front of Howland Island, which is a tiny little island the size of Central Park. And the thing is, if everything goes wrong and you miss the island, you can. If I'm talking to a pilot, but from the sky, I understand that it could look like a cloud. It's easy to miss, and if you miss it, and there were supposed to be smoke warnings coming out of the boat, but the
Mhm.
wind kept it flat.
Ah,
um, they missed it, but they got so close that the man puts his head out of the window because he thinks that Earhart is at Howland Island. But she's literally telling them, "We're out of fuel. We're
yeah,
out of fuel."
yeah.
And that's where another part of the story is, which is there's big money in mystery. There's less money in telling you how it happened. And there are salaries to be made by nonprofit search organizations that give the director a $250,000 nonprofit salary every year. There's a lot of money in mystery. I've been to Atchison, Kansas 3 times where Amelia Earhart was born. That's a little bit like the Graceland of Amelia Earhart. If you're an Amelia Earhart fan, there's a wonderful festival that happens in July around her birthday. I was the one of the headlines with some country music stars last year.
Oh, cool,
Um,
very fun.
and every year there's 50,000 people that go to this festival. There's a lot of Amelia Earhart fans.
Mhm.
And how do you get people to come to a smaller town in Kansas? Mystery sells. And even in Kansas, they know that she ran out of fuel. Her family know her, the relatives that are living, from the Putnams or from the Earharts, they all know that she ran out of fuel. But mystery sells books, it sells television specials, it sells tourism,
Yeah.
right? And I'm here to tell you she ran out of fuel.
Well, so I have a question for you. So as you were still, I think you had already launched the book or whatever, President Trump announced releasing Amelia Earhart files, and then I lost the trail on that. What did you?
First of all, I had those files already.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the things that I put this in my acknowledgments page, is I sold this book. This took 5 years to write, which
Mhm.
is a long time, but it was worth it. I sold the book in November 2019. The first thing you need to do if anyone is thinking of writing a historical nonfiction book is get your research done. Those deadlines go faster than you think. I flew to Purdue University, where the majority of the archives that were given by Putnam's family are. Of course, they're handpicked, not to be unflatter
Right.
so they're not not unflattering to Putnam.
Yeah.
But then I went to Boston where her sister gave a lot of the archives. Even her sister, who did not believe anything other than she ran out of fuel, is also taking out her sexuality of the arch I mean, like, people are still cleaning it in different ways. But one of the things I did is get that done fast. What happens then, I had my father pass away right before the pandemic, but he knew that I sold my book, which was great. He was an older father. He loved Amelia Earhart, by the way.
Aw,
He talked to me about the day that he was born in 1920, and he told me about the day that when Amelia Earhart disappeared.
wow.
Then the pandemic happened.
Yeah,
And it was really hard to research. I got in a few more things before everything closed down. Fortunately, University of New Hampshire, which was one of the great places that I researched, where I had all of Hilton Rayleigh's remembrances. He's such a key player in the story. For those of you that know anything about the military, Hilton Rayleigh would later go on to lead a unit called the Ghost Army, which was a very secret unit where artists would make fake tanks out of cardboard, and audio recordings would be made to confuse Japanese and Germans about, how many people were in the field. Well, he was the one who, back in 1928, found Amelia Earhart, and he kept that quiet, and he kept his Ghost Army antics quiet. And we're only finding out about the Ghost Army now. He had a lot to say about the Amelia and George story, so that was an incredible archive. But the thing that you need to know is that you got to keep going and digging, and don't accept anything as the legitimate story. One of the things I discovered is that George Putnam had a hand in the propaganda that Amelia Earhart was missing because he was making money off of that story. Those archives are again at the Eisenhower Library. I'm not talking about crazy archives. This is in a presidential archive.
right.
This is in Becky Cochran's papers. I also was able to find out like lots more by just going to Oklahoma City, is where the 99's archives are. And they were getting calls from the Putnam family that, why can't we control this? And like, we're the 99's. We're not. This is not Purdue. This is not the Putnam collection. They have
Wow.
their own archives there, their own stories. There's a lot of women's archives that are in Oklahoma that knew Amelia Earhart. Not everyone loved her. Most people did, but everyone respected her because she was really a leader. This is something that we don't think about Amelia Earhart, is that, as you mentioned before, as a pilot, there are women that were really going for aviation records and increasing their skill. I don't think that's what Amelia Earhart's MO was. I think she loved flying. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think she was about the record so much as she was about pushing women up.
Yep.
And also saving aviation when she had a reason to be suddenly in her 30s, and she was the most famous woman in the world after 1932 when she crossed the Atlantic, and I mean that. She
Yeah.
was not famous for disappearing, she was famous for achievement, and she realized that she had the world's attention, and she spoke about women's rights and the future of aviation, and that's what I think motivated her. Now, you don't see that in the other pilots who were in fact better pilots than Amelia Earhart.
Right.
They are not pushing women's rights. They are pushing
Yeah.
their achievements, their goals, their records.
I have in front of me, just by coincidence, because Jackie and Jenny and I are going to be talking about it this week. This is a book, Woman in Flying, by Lady Mary Heath and
I have
Stella
that book,
Wolf
yeah.
Murray. Yeah, and Stella was a journalist like you, and Lady Mary Heath obviously is a very famous pilot. And I will give them credit for doing something similar in this book. Combined, Stella is hardcore, giving the hard press, promotion of aviation at the time, trying to get people to be air minded and those kinds of things. And then same with Lady Mary Heath. But you're right, when you get to the other memoirs, not all of them are actively advocating not just for women's rights, but also to convince everyone that aviation is safe and should, even as passengers,
Right.
support the
I
advancement of it.
I do think that Amelia Earhart, if she had lived and she came very close to making that last flight, we wouldn't be having this conversation, obviously.
Yeah.
But I do think that she was not a full professor at Purdue. She was like a visiting consultant. dropped in for a couple weeks, but she was teaching women mechanics. She was teaching women to be aviators.
Yeah,
She loved this job, okay?
yeah.
I think she would have become a full professor. Purdue is very well known for its aviation, its space program. I think she would have been very involved with the space program.
I think so too.
And I don't think, I mean, we look at Jackie Cochran, okay? Now she's preventing women from going into the space program.
Yes, that so that's just a that's a wonderful little, contrast right there because you have 2 women who came up from not as much as they ended with, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying that,
Remember,
Amelia.
Jackie Cochran is, also made up her orphan
Yeah,
past.
of course, but
You know,
she didn't
but
grow
was a
up
great
well.
pilot. She
She
was
did
a
not grow
great
up
pilot.
with wealth, though. I
Right,
mean, I don't think that that could be disputed.
right,
And
right.
then Amelia, I mean, it doesn't sound like they were destitute or anything, but,
She lived with her grandparents'
right,
wealth, and she also lived with her
right.
father, who was also an alcoholic, which is a big part of the book is alcoholism.
Both married very wealthy men, which
Yes,
enabled them to pursue their interests and their passion, which was aviation,
yes,
and also promoting women, but only for Jackie. It was only if it was going to promote Jackie as well.
absolutely.
And not that Amelia was necessarily ever put in that situation where she had to, jockey for her own attention over other women. George was doing enough of that behind the scenes for
But
her.
she was, she's caught, being good on paper.
Yeah,
Like, she's like, there when I say that I'm finding, oh, she didn't write her books but I'm also
right,
finding in the archives that she's being super kind to women that, don't have the opportunities
correct.
that she has.
Right, right. So it's
She's
just an
caught being
interesting
good.
contrast. Yeah, yeah, no, whereas Jackie was definitely all about Jackie and
Right.
about other women when it was convenient to her and her
Correct.
power and control. Yeah. Very interesting. Wow, well, so we have covered a lot, like, and you kind of woven in some of the other things that I would have liked to, maybe parse out, as an author only conversation, but you've already woven them in terms of how you wrote this book or, pursued some of of all of the research that you did. What was like the most either the pivotal thing that you feel like tied this whole story together for you or just like the most shocking discovery from your personal perspective?
I think the shocking discovery was, I wrote a first draft where I had used my, at that point, 4 years of research. And then I knew that no one had listened to these tapes, and I would fly into Virginia where the tapes were being held. I would spend hundreds of dollars just to get, we had masks on, but I just wanna get on my face in and say, "I need to be first." I was a pest, but a good, like, I wanted to be first, and I was. The second that the tapes were available, they were finally digitized. I had 6 weeks to go before my deadline, and I asked for
Wow.
a six-month extension because you can't just do 6
Yeah.
weeks. I had to listen to 200 hours of tapes. Every single tape was more startling than the next. It was just and instead of my guessing what people were thinking, I could hear people like Amelia Earhart's children. Do you know that she had stepchildren? She was a
Yeah.
mom,
Yeah.
right? Her kids talking about her, and nicely, by the way, which is a good thing for stepmom. The 3 wives of George Putnam, 3 other wives are on those tapes. All of the women pilots of the day are on those tapes.
And did you anticipate that becoming available when you started this project?
Not when I started, and I heard, but you get on a beat, and I heard about it, and I started to make my own luck. I started to write articles that were real articles, but I was trying to get closer to people. I got to meet Amelia Earhart's niece. She just recently passed away. I was the last one to interview her. She was the last person to know Amelia Earhart pretty well.
Wow.
And I was able to, and then she also just believed that Amelia Earhart ran out of fuel, by the way, and that everything else is nonsense. Um, so, I mean, it was really, but there was all parts of it. But the tapes, just all the guesses that I had, and then the other final archive that was just incredible was this interview that was done by Stuart Stern, when he the one who had written Rebel Without a Cause, which was in the Eisenhower archives because it just really showed that even after Amelia Earhart's death, George Putnam believed that she ran out of fuel and he was using her own death to do propaganda to make money. And that just shocked me. And I want to remind everyone, and people can watch this movie, Flight for Freedom is a movie that was a propaganda movie in the 40s about a character by Rosalind Russell, played by Rosalind Russell. It's supposed to be Amelia Earhart, and George Putnam was suing RKO, which was owned by Jackie Cochran's husband, Floyd Oldham, and he's in these records saying, "Oh, this was all just an act." Um, and basically, she's a spy. And Amelia Earhart was a pacifist, a militant pacifist. She's not going to be a spy, but 1 million men saw that movie at war, and Amelia Earhart started to pop up all over the Pacific. So you
Right,
have to understand the propaganda behind this story, the money making. Amelia Earhart's story changes in the 60s when it becomes a cottage industry of conspiracy, when we're having all sorts of conspiracy stories in the news. By the end of the 60s, 60 Minutes is telling us that she was taken by the Japanese. I mean, it's complete and utter nonsense.
it's shocking, it's shocking.
I will tell you, just to wrap this up, that I think the mystery of Amelia Earhart is not how she died, which is really not that much of a mystery. The
Yeah,
mystery of Amelia Earhart to me was, and remember, I started out not knowing a lot about her at all. That was the reason I started the book. But the mystery is, who was she? And
yeah,
I'm a woman. You're a woman. I want to see a real life.
for
I don't
sure.
I don't care if she's like, said she's never cursing or she's never smoking and I mean, I want her to have sex. I want her to have a cigarette now and then. I mean, well, she's a person,
If
like, that's much more interesting to me.
For me too. And Lori, here's where I say a huge thank you to you because here's the deal. Like anybody who listens to my podcast knows that when we get a memoir from somebody and it tells me nothing about them, I just want to throw it out the window. I don't care. And so for example, we did the fun of it. And I was like, I don't even know why we
That
wasted our
was
time.
ghostwritten.
Yeah, well, A, it was ghostwritten, and B, like, it doesn't even attempt
No,
to
it's
tell us
nothing.
really anything about her, it's just a sales pitch for aviation,
Right.
and whatever, that's not what I wanna read. I wanna read what you wrote, and when I know that it is well researched, I'm even happier. I'll take a little, tall tale every now and then just for entertainment, but when we have a book that claims to be, nonfiction, I'm really excited when I can get
I'm
one
so
like
glad you
yours.
enjoyed it, and,
Oh, yeah.
if anyone is interested, when you do a popular nonfiction book, you get a bigger advance than an academic book, and I use my advance, much to my husband's chagrin. I like to I like to actually research, but I also you have to pay for your own photos and the clearance of the photos, which is
This
the
is
most.
a big thing. Talk a little bit about this because this is a big reason why I think I'm not going to publish the book that I'm working on as a history textbook. I think what I'm going to do is a trade book that does not have pictures because I don't really it would be I would work on that for the next 15 years.
Well, certain photos that are owned by Getty, for example, and
Exactly.
they just charge you a lot of money.
Yep.
So one of the things that I did, I find it easier to research and write, which is hard to begin with, than to clear photos. But I wanted to take you have to pay for your own photos. It
Yep.
comes out of your advance. And I didn't want my readers to have the same old photos. If I'm saying that that George Putnam pretended the Putnam books was being blown up by fascists or that he faked his own kidnapping, I'm gonna show you a picture of him faking his own kidnapping.
Yeah.
I'm not playing around. I want the photos to help tell its own story, right? There you go. It's again, not in the scholastic book, that's my mantra. And, the thing I wanted to say is that I got put 62 photos in the book, and that cost a lot of money.
Well,
That
thank you
could have
for that.
been a nice trip for me to, Caribbean, but I don't want my readers to go away with the same old, same old. I want
Yep.
you to leave the book and say, "Wow, I understand this on a different level," and it's not just in the words and the article backups and all that stuff. Here are some photos that are showing me what's going on as well. And you can see that Amelia Earhart is, I mean, she's reinvented in the 30s also as she was notoriously unglamorous according to her sister, and she's reinvented as has a redo by,
Yeah.
the photographers, and she's beautiful. She gains 10 pounds. They purposely for photographs. That's partly because she's launching her own clothing line, right? And those are some of the most beautiful photos of Amelia Earhart. And I will say that one of the things that I will tell you is that, if things come along that change the story of Amelia Earhart, I'm a journalist, I would be like, "Great. If you got the evidence, I missed it." But I don't think I missed a lot. I'm listening to audios. I actually just missed one lover of Amelia Earhart I just heard about, which is backed up for me. It's another man. I've only found men. If something comes along that changes a story, I've had people say, "Oh, of course she's lesbian." I'm like, "Not so much. This is not what I'm finding."
Yeah.
I don't have any agenda. I just came in as a journalist. Again, I'm a professor of journalism at NYU Journalism School. I teach my students not to take um, the story seriously until you fact checked it. If somebody is telling you a story that sounds too good to be true, that like Amelia flew 400 miles away from where she ran out of fuel and landed on an island, how is that possible? Is
Right.
there money being made? Oh, there's an expedition. Oh, there's a salary taken. You've got to follow the money,
Mhm.
and I do believe that there is one group that, is in the right direction, which is the I'm not paid by them, I just happen to interview them, is Nauticus.
Mhm.
They're looking around Howland Island, and I do think that Amelia Earhart's plane or will be found at the bottom of the, Pacific Ocean, which is not the Atlantic, it's much deeper, and
Yeah.
we had trouble finding the Titanic, and that's Titanic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the Atlantic, which is like a pond compared to the Pacific. But I
Mm.
do think that technology is getting better, and I do think at that level that water preserves, planes, and if you're a Titanic buff, by the way, you know that paper preserves, and Amelia and Fred Noonan were communicating by a jerry-rigged fishing pole with notes. Paper might their notes might preserve, the bones would not be around, but there would be buttons or, shoes. But you would definitely see the plane preserved very well, if it survived. And I don't think it's anywhere else. I even Purdue University being involved with this Michigas, that's a New York word, about, about, like, I think they're basically just branding that this is a plane that they were involved with, because if the plane is found, I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of money to be made
Yeah.
on the Amelia Earhart plane and the story of finding the plane, and I think Purdue wants to brand that now, even though I don't believe that they believe it's in the lagoon.
Yeah.
That's a story that I'm just kind of disappointed in Purdue for even putting out there. I do think that she is, within 20 miles of Howland Island.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. So, since I have an audience full of readers, do you have any other books, whether they're about Amelia or about her contemporaries or this time period, that you would recommend that people visit?
I mean, it's not the best written book, but it's so authentic to herself. I love Aviatrix by Eleanor Smith.
Oh, you don't think it was well written? I think it's
I
absolutely
also love it.
fabulous.
I mean, it's just it it has voice.
Yeah,
It
it
does
has a voice. It's
it is
gosh,
the
she's
opposite of AI writing, is
love
what I'm
her.
trying to tell you. Like,
Love her.
you can almost hear I interviewed people that knew Eleanor Smith lived very long. I
Mhm.
interviewed people that flew with her, that knew her. I interviewed the aviation reporters from the New York Times that were now
So
in their
cool.
90s. They said she just told her story never changes.
No, and I
I
actually
feel
just
like
listened in preparation for this, actually on a website about Mary Heath, listened to an interview with Eleanor about Lady Mary and other things that were going on at the time, and it's just identical, like, she's very consistent in her
I
stories.
fact checked her too,
Yes.
and everything was perfect. Whenever I would fact check Putnam,
Yeah.
things would fall apart. One
Yeah.
of the things that's really interesting is Lady Heath. I interviewed her biographer.
Mhm.
There's a really good, it's an Irish,
Yeah, yeah. I
biographer.
I
I
have
get
this book, like, right over here. It's Lady Icarus.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's a wonderful book, and I was able to, by during the pandemic, by Zoom, interview her biographer, and she was confirming a lot of how George Putnam would have, people pretend to be flying Amelia Earhart and how that he kind of tormented Lady Heath. He would cancel her appearances with Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, Lady Heath was Eleanor's mentor, and
Right.
she had his number to a T and was, like,
Absolutely.
guiding
I
her the
think
whole time.
those are 2 fascinating biographies.
Yeah.
I mean, there's I read all of them. I think that, one of the things that's interesting is that, there's just Pancho Barnes is, like, an
Oh,
amazing
I
character.
know.
I mean, like, oh, it's such a colorful cast of characters.
It is.
My hope is that the person I mean, we have other rivals of Amelia Earhart that, are in this book, and they're scattered throughout the book, but my hope is that I've helped, uh, kind of take Eleanor Smith back
Yeah.
from I was disgusted. I'm not gonna pull any punches, by other biographers dismissing her as a liar, because
Wow, I see,
I
I
mean
haven't run into those stories, and that kinda
right,
pisses me
and
off.
it's she's not lying. The more I fact checked, the more she was telling the truth, and the thing that was really interesting is that also, I completely 100% believe that Amelia Earhart did not get her transport license in, 1929. She was not flying well, and that's for the best pilots.
You put the picture in here.
I think it's 1930.
Yeah, we see the
It's like
picture.
it's just it's like and there's other paperwork. It's not just that license. I was getting pushback. "Oh, how could she be a bad pilot when Eleanor is just jealous when she had the transport license?"
Yeah,
Well, she didn't have the license. But
yeah,
Amelia does take lessons, and she does break a lot of records.
yeah.
Let's get that on the record. But every time she's often taking her life in her hands. There's a lot
Listen,
of near misses. Of course, a lot of people listening to this podcast know who Evel Knievel was, and eventually he dies by one of his own stunts. And I think that when you really make it that in situations where you almost died, you start to believe your own luck.
yeah,
And I think that Amelia Earhart, at a certain point, maybe, who knows, this is, maybe felt that she was gonna just it's a crapshoot. Let's do it.
yeah,
Again, that whole expression that I said, "get home-itis."
yep,
Remember, she was very ill when she
yep,
was coming home, and she was not in a good place with the person that she was her navigator, and there was a lot of money on the line. Putnam, there's, aviation reporters that were, embedded on the ships that were waiting for Amelia and were there watching, messages come from Putnam saying, "You've gotta hurry up. I've got you on NBC." I mean, and again, I don't think that Putnam killed Amelia Amelia Earhart was a willing participant on all of this.
yeah,
She
but
was a
it's the
queen,
combination of things, that got her the platform that she received and also put the pressure on her to do things that she maybe wasn't
and
ready to
she
do.
very easily could have made it,
Yeah,
and we wouldn't
then
be
we wouldn't
having
be
this conversation,
we
you
would have
know?
something totally different in front of us.
But she was a very brave woman, and I want to reiterate that from all I can make out from years and years of research, she was very good to other women, um, and she was very good to the aviation industry, and even Eleanor Smith pretty much adored her.
Yeah,
Tells
I
you a lot.
got the same impression. Now, in your research, did you run into any characters, particularly women in aviation, since that's my focus, who you felt needed more they should be written about, but they aren't, or they're somebody should go dig that trail? Who is there
Oh,
that stands out to you?
that I hope that somebody I can't remember her Tiny?
Tiny, okay.
Oh, she was a oh, what,
Let me see if I
maybe
can
we can
find it. Yeah, hang
she was
on.
a little pilot, a little tiny pilot who was a test pilot. I think she's a fascinating story.
No.
I was fascinated by, I mean, not that she's not known, but I was fascinated by how Bessie Coleman comes before Amelia Earhart. One of the things that's in my book is
No.
that the Smithsonian, honors Amelia Earhart in the 60s, or the late 50s, and her sister Muriel, who lives very well into her, into her late 90s, is there, and Bessie Coleman comes before Amelia Earhart and um, has not been, acknowledged by the Smithsonian at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting. And one of the things that if anyone is researching, aviators, one of the tricks of my trade was I didn't just go off of the regular archives. I went into, African American archives of the newspapers or many newspapers. I got to see stories that were not being covered in the white press. I went into all the different specialized. I went into socialist archives. I could see that Amelia Earhart was very left wing. And but at the towards her death, her she was a Democrat. Her husband, George Putnam, was a Republican. It was a mixed marriage.
Mixed marriage.
um,
Yeah.
it was that would have been interesting conversations at night. I mean, she was championing for Roosevelt, but
Mhm.
originally she would have been a member of the Women's Party in 1928, and Herbert Hoover was, the Republican Party went with the Women's Party, not the Democrats.
Right.
So she would have voted Republican then. But I think what's so interesting is to go off your beaten path of archives. Think out of the box. Remember, one of until I got the tapes, which was my gold prize, my first big hit was these archives of Paul Briand in University of New Hampshire, and no one had looked at it because he was just a conspiracy theorist, and you know what? But that's where I saw lots of people that were not didn't agree with Paul Briand, but like people like Hilton Rayleigh and other women pilots that knew both George and Amelia, um, and other people that knew them, talking off the record. So thinking out of the box, like
Yeah.
you can actually look at something called Archive. If anyone wants to write about women in aviation, look at Archive Grid, which is an online site which is free, and it will tell you where archives are all over the world. Well, they
Wonderful.
might have a couple of letters by your pilot that you're wanting to write about, but, there might be 2 but you can often email the librarian and have them send it to you digitally, you don't have to fly everywhere.
That's
But that's
great.
how I was able to find archives. People go to the same places. Purdue
Yeah.
University has the largest collection of Amelia Earhart stuff, but it's been picked over. And
Yeah.
if you're gonna find something new, you gotta go out of the box.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And that's yeah, we've seen that with with the information that Keith O'Brien was able to pull up about Florence Klansmith. I
And who,
while
by
it,
the way, Keith O'Brien went to one of the Keith O'Brien blurred my book. I
I
just read
know, I know it's right there in the middle. I
I
saw
mean,
that.
but he another a wonderful place for, archives for women aviators that I went to was Cleveland. I went into
Mhm.
Women's Museum of
Yep,
Aviation.
yep,
They have an incredible amount of archives there.
yep.
So if people are particularly interested in women aviators, I would say go to, contact the 99s Museum in Oklahoma
Mhm.
City, and in Cleveland, the Women's Museum of Aviation.
Yep.
Extraordinary archives in both
And then the
spots.
Texas Women's University has the WASP archives for more recent history. And then the one other book I was going to mention because you were bringing up the black newspapers of the time, while she wrote it and marketed it as a fiction, but A Pair of Wings by Carol Hobson. She's a journalist and she also did a lot of that digging into the black newspapers for the story of Bessie Coleman. So,
Right, and
uh,
Bessie Coleman, I just went to a play about Bessie Coleman, and I'm so glad, if you go to the Smithsonian now and you see the big banners and you see the early aviation, you see Amelia Earhart has been put next to it has just reopened after 7 years, by the way. If
right.
you haven't been back, go
Yep,
back.
I've been back and they were still working on part of it, but yeah,
Yeah, but the early aviators unit just reopened, and, the Spirit of St. Louis is right next to her Vega that you
yep,
cross the land. It's pretty exciting, but right not a few feet away is a whole display on Bessie Coleman, and so the Smithsonian has definitely discovered
yeah.
Bessie Coleman now, but I don't think she's still as well known as Amelia Earhart,
I
and
can
she
I I can vouch for that because I go and do outreach events all the time, and people generally know who Amelia Earhart is, and then
right,
they're
and I
like,
will
"Ooh, I've heard of her. I don't know her name." So we got keep working
one
on it.
thing I will tell you is that during Amelia Earhart's lifetime, Charles Lindbergh was the most famous person in the I mean, he it was I'm actually writing a book about Albert Einstein right now. He was the other most famous person, but it's between Lindbergh and Einstein. And Lindbergh, people used to dress up like Lindbergh and all that stuff, and they wanted to, now nobody dresses up like Lindbergh. You go to the aviation museums on aviation days,
Well, he scandalized himself, so
right, but a lot of people Amelia Earhart's legacy keeps
right,
rising and rising,
right.
and little girls and little boys, they're all fascinated by Amelia Earhart, and this is something that I'm gonna say, um I have found that there are a lot of men interested in Amelia Earhart, which is really interesting to me because a lot of women lives, will be books bought by women. But I have as many male readers on this book as I do women. And I find that most of the women entering the book are looking to find out about their hero or, is she worthy of being my hero? Where most of the men who are reading the book are trying to find out, do I have new information about what happened to Amelia Earhart? But it doesn't matter because you're reading about women in aviation.
That's right.
And I said that expression before that Amelia Earhart gets you in the tent, and for some people, may she be a starter drug to
That's right.
explore the larger world of the incredible world of women in aviation.
Yeah, I have accepted that. You mentioned earlier that there are hundreds and hundreds of books written about her. I have a website that where I, claim to be the central source of finding books on women in aviation, but I confess that I do not have every book that is still in print about Amelia Earhart because
I think I do.
it would take up my whole website, and
I
I
know.
and I want people to know about other people too. So, but it is
That's one of
fascinating.
the secrets of when I was researching during the pandemic is I did get a lot of stuff from the library, but I would often find the cheapest copy available on eBay or eBooks,
Yeah.
and my library is not full of first editions, but I had the book in my house.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm building mine still. Some I'm not gonna this one is an interlibrary loan because
Oh,
it's
those are great. Interlibrarians are great.
$400, and I'm being very respectful of it and just using index cards folded over, so I'm not putting sticky things on it, because it's a 97-year-old book, and I don't wanna
I
do
will
that.
recommend a website called Bookfinder. Do you know
Okay.
Bookfinder? And it includes Amazon and eBay, but it will show you where every copy of a book is, and
Oh, I love it.
often sellers that are not on Amazon and eBay. And often I'll see a book that's selling for $300 and find a copy for $12 on Bookfinder.
Perfect. Okay, I'm definitely gonna use that. I don't think I've found that one yet. That's amazing. Now, we're gonna wrap things up here in just a second, but I
Sure.
wanted to I saw that you were doing, like, the Amelia Earhart or the Aviator and the Showman walking tour of New York City, and I was
Absolutely.
so like, I really wanted to do it. Tell me, do you have any other events, any other things coming up that
Oh,
people
I
can
do.
intersect with?
As I mentioned, I'm gonna be leading a tour, and there's gonna be a recreated Amelia Earhart dinner in Harrison. I'm the Harrison Literary Ambassador. That's where Amelia Earhart's house with George was on the border of Rye and Harrison, so Harrison does not like me to say Rye. Um
Okay, got it.
I am going to be in Boston this summer. They have something called History Camp where 400 history fans come from all over the country. I'm doing an Amelia Earhart event. I just won the Kansas Book Award, so I will be in Topeka to receive it, which is great when you're writing about Amelia Earhart and Kansas gives you that
That's
award.
right.
And I'm going to Mississippi Book Festival in the fall. And there's all sorts of things. I have a website, lauriegwenshapiro.com, and I keep my events very current. I've done over 45 events this year, so I'm I still love it. And as I mentioned, I'm starting to write about Albert Einstein, but you have to remember that Amelia Earhart and Albert Einstein were at the same time. So there's a lot of overlap there. In fact, I'm one of my things I'm trying to find right now is a moment when Amelia Earhart and Albert Einstein are in the room at the same time.
Oh, yeah, that was y that
I've gotten them both with Charlie Chaplin, but I haven't gotten them in the same room at the same time yet. But I'm having a lot of fun, and I hope that that's the other thing. I don't think that writing has to be boring. I used to write novels. I'm a documentary director as well, and I've tried to make my book feel novelistic or cinematic, have you say. But one of the things that I have done that I think is really helped this book, in addition to the archival research, I've gone to the places that I'm writing about. I've been to New Guinea, I've been to Newfoundland, I've been, I'm not just writing about Cleveland or Oklahoma, I'm going there, like
yeah,
I'm going to the places and Miami. Of course, the last place we see her in the United States is Miami. I went to all the relics of, the airports that are left over. Um, and I just hope that you feel character and plot and setting, which are things that you sort of associate with novels or films, but And there's dialogue. You can
Mhm.
absolutely use dialogue in nonfiction, which people never use, but you have to source it. You cannot this is not historical fiction.
Right.
There's not a single word I made up in this book.
Incredible.
Everything has been sourced, and, Viking Books, Penguin, fact checked the heck out of the book when it came out, and then also, as I said, the big excerpts have been in the I've written for The Atlantic and for The New Yorker. They've both fact checked me. The Atlantic, I wanna say one thing. I wrote a piece in response to Donald Trump's, thing about the files that there was no there. One of the things is there's no when people love conspiracies, sometimes the truth is just the truth, and I was able to meet someone, it's in my book, a naval spy during the pandemic when I was walking across the Williamsburg Bridge, and I was given boxes and boxes of classified information that was eventually what was released, and this it's been a while now, there's nothing there. Amelia Earhart ran out of fuel, but I think what you should read my book for is to find out who Amelia Earhart was as a
I
human
agree.
being.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I mean, George Putnam and his antics are
And that makes it better.
entertaining.
I mean, it's a better story,
Yeah.
frankly, and
Yeah, for sure.
it's the story that Stewart Stern wanted to do for a 1973 movie that he put the kibosh on because he realized that you can't write about Amelia Earhart without talking about how Machiavellian George Putnam was, and his 4th wife was alive, and Amelia's sister was alive, and it
Oh,
was just gonna be unseemly, but it was
yeah.
really nice, he's won Oscars for screenwriting. It made me feel really, I found that archive, and also at the University of Iowa was more, um, I felt good that someone who's won top awards for screenwriting so the same story was what
Yeah,
was
it's
published.
validating, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. W so you mentioned the website. We can go find your event schedule there. I see you on social media.
I'm at
You're on
Laurie Stories on
Lori
Instagram.
That's right. And you've mentioned I have 2 more questions for you, 2 more threads I wanna
Sure.
pop down. The first is, I'm curious to know about the, uh, journalism professor position that you have. Tell me how you came into that. I'm interested in maybe pursuing some adjunct kind of stuff, so
Oh,
I'm
sure.
curious. Yeah,
I remember I was told that that's not who I was when I
right?
said this is ki and so I got that, so at 55, when they approached me, I thought I was being punked, I gotta be honest. I thought I was they were like, "We want you to be a professor,"
Okay.
and the reason they wanted me to be a professor was I'm the teacher's professor, for online masters, so anyone can actually, get it's an NYU has 2 master's programs. One is online, you can take it from anywhere, my students are all over the world,
Okay.
or you can be students on the New York campus. It's just you have to get the same degree,
Right,
um but the thing is that, a lot of professors are not out there in the field still working,
right.
and I am not just writing books, but I'm constantly writing articles. I write for the New York Times quite frequently. I write for The Atlantic. I write for The New Yorker. I'm working on a New Yorker piece at the moment that hopefully will go through. Um, and I pitch all the time and I get rejected all the time. And I get accepted once in a while. And it just seems like everything's roses. But students need to know how, the donuts get made.
Yeah,
And, someone who retired from working and is teaching 20 years later doesn't have that same experience. Like I can actually say, well, you know what? Why don't you pitch that my editor? Why don't you do that? And that's
yeah.
been really wonderful to see some of my students, um, pitch. And my students, by the way, are not 18. Everyone's over 21. I have students in their 20s all the way up to the 70s, and it's been amazing. One of the things that I take the greatest pleasure as a teacher is seeing, middle-aged women, seeing them.
Yeah,
A lot of women just it's like, we don't people they think they're not paying attention, and I teach women how to level the paying field as well as the playing field,
I love that.
and the way is to make your story incredible, and access is the key. So, it's not just that I wrote an Amelia Earhart story, I had access to incredible archives.
Right.
Right? So when I went to the New Yorker to see if they would do a first serial, I had information that no one else had. You're gonna
Mhm.
pay me for that.
Yep.
right? So that is the way if you're trying to get a book deal, you need to have access. And also pick a story that is extraordinary. I could have just done the same recycling of Amelia Earhart was the world's greatest American woman pilot, and there was a Rosie. I mean, that's just not the story. But I'm not just making up a story. I have evidence.
Yeah,
This is new. So if you're actually interested in pitching an article to a newspaper or a magazine, or you're pitching a book, and I imagine this is a bunch of readers, there might be some writers as well.
for sure.
Make sure that you have access to the story. You don't have to be famous. You might have a family member that was in World War II. I mean, I wrote a piece for the New York Times about a pilot named Cy Spiegel that did very well. It's spawned 2 podcasts and won some medals. I just met him on the street. He was a 97-year-old man who had done 37 missions over Nazi Germany,
Wow.
and that was the great read for the New York Times. I I pitched that I had a yes in 12 seconds. I had a living, World War II pilot. I mean, who would
Yeah,
live walking around New York? Who do you have in your family?
yeah.
Does anyone here have military people? If you have anyone that was involved with World War II that's alive, oh my god, text me a message or send me an email, lgsnyc@gmail.com. I'll give that out to you. Send me a message. You've got to get those stories down.
Yeah,
Oral history is a great way to get published.
yep.
You might, you're basically taking the story, and even if you're not wanting to get published, by all means, if you know older women aviators, for example, get their stories down and donate their stories to the local library. That's another way that I found tremendous information. Self-published books by people that were in their 90s, that were witnesses to this. Audio tapes that were in libraries by people that were not famous, but their children donated their tapes to the local library. You too can do that. You don't have to
Oh,
be a writer. You can contribute to American history, especially if you have any connection to any older members of society that have memories of the old days of aviation. I think it's a privilege to write these stories.
you made some, like, little synapses, like, lock on in my brain when you were talking about that, so I started you're giving me
Listen to me,
ideas
a
about things that I should do.
103-year-old woman who knew Albert Einstein.
Yeah, okay, so let's wrap up with this. Okay, you decided to write about, Einstein. What's going on there? What's your angle, or what are you ready to talk
Oh,
about, and
I'm
what's your
ready to
timeline?
start because who was the most famous woman in the 1930s in the world? Amelia Earhart.
Yeah,
Who was the most famous man in the 1930s was Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein was somewhat used up. I mean, he was still doing science, but his heyday was behind him. He was fleeing Nazi Germany. He went to California, then he landed in New Jersey at Princeton, at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. But he was using his platform for good. He was fighting fascism, he was fighting authoritarianism. This is an American history book, just like the Amelia Earhart book is American history. We're at America's 250, and here's someone that was warning us about Nazi Germany trying to get people out. He's also fighting racism. He's giving physics lectures at Black campuses. I mean, that's extraordinary,
it is extraordinary.
1933. So
Yep,
this is an Albert Einstein that I was very interested in, is how did he become an American, and how did America use him, and how did he use America?
yeah,
And again, what is really he's not a perfect person. He had a lot of, extramarital affairs, which is not unknown to the world if you've followed it, but he's a real person. And I think what's really interesting to me is that here are 2 people who are world famous, and they're using their platform for good. And now we get people that are incredibly famous and do not use their platform for the betterment of man and womankind, you know?
yep, I
And I
agree.
find that really interesting. And more than ever, we need to look at the history of fighting fascism.
Yeah, we sure do. Well, we'll leave it with that. I cannot wait to see what you do with that book. Laurie, thank you so much for all the work that you put
What
into
an
this
honor it's
story.
been on. I'm a big fan.
Oh my gosh, thank you, and I am a huge fan. I can't wait to talk about this in the book club. I hope some of our I'm really hoping that some of our friends who reacted to this book emotionally, if you reacted in some way and it didn't maybe jive with, your impressions or what you've known about Amelia in some way, I would love to hear those perspectives in the
And I would love
conversation.
anyone to I'm gonna give a as a professorial assignment. I would love anyone who is challenging anything that I'm saying to go to the Amelia Earhart tapes, which are online and free, readily available. You can bring it up in 1 minute and go to the Louise Thaden tapes.
Love it.
They're extraordinary. Is
I'm gonna
that what
go I love Louise Theden. We
that
talked
was
about
one of
High,
her
Wide,
best
and Frightened.
friends.
In fact, we didn't start when we started doing the Aviatrix classics and reading biographies. The first book we read was, I Taught Amelia to Fly by Netta
I never
Snook.
snook.
Uh-huh, and then the second one was Louise Theden, and then we got to Amelia because
Right,
yep, yep,
right.
absolutely, I can't wait to listen to that.
Okay,
Well
well, I'm just saying that Louise Thaden talks at length about
yeah,
Amelia Earhart's,
okay,
being her like, situation she was having with George Putnam,
yeah,
and also the fact that she loved him and was also, like, fighting about, like, which direction, and eventually Amelia Earhart listens to Putnam,
yeah,
and, this people that she's not the only person on tape saying that,
yeah,
and I feel that, Eleanor White is another person that we can look at. She's in my the New Yorker excerpt of if anyone is also interested, you can look at look up my name and Amelia Earhart in the New Yorker, and there's a full excerpt which is involving this time period.
yeah.
And that was all tremendously fact checked.
Well, I can't wait to go check those out. Thank you so much, Lori. Good luck to you. Can't wait to see what else you pull up.
Lovely. So thank you for letting me spend so much time with you.
It was amazing.